Ladies and gentlemen, there is a strange and profound clarity that comes to a man after he has lost someone truly significant in his life. It doesn't arrive immediately, and it doesn't come softly. It's often in the noisiness of blame, denial, or distraction fades away that these realizations strike. And when they do, they cut deeply. Today I want to speak about 3 things men often realize after losing her, the partner, the confidante, the person who was, in many ways, a mirror reflecting their best and worst selves. Gratitude is often something we fail to recognize in the moment. It's not because we're indifferent or intentionally unappreciative, but because the human mind tends to normalize what is constant. When someone is always there offering their presence, care, and energy, it becomes easy to assume that they always will be. The subtle beauty of their contributions can fade into the background of our busy lives, eclipsed by distractions or the pursuit of personal goals. But when she is gone, the absence is felt in ways that words struggle to convey. It's in the empty seat at the table, the silence that fills once vibrant conversations, or the missing warmth of a reassuring glance. These were the things that seemed so ordinary at the time, yet they were extraordinary in their ability to provide comfort, stability, and connection. Men often realize too late that her laughter wasn't just noise, but a kind of music that brightened their days. The way she supported and encouraged them wasn't an obligation, it was a gift. Her presence, her care, her love, none of it was guaranteed. Yet it was offered freely without expectation of anything more than respect and reciprocation. The loss of these small, consistent acts of love and kindness creates an overwhelming void. It forces a man to look back and see all the moments he overlooked, all the gestures he failed to acknowledge. And in that reflection, he understands the depth of what he took for granted. It's a sobering, often painful realization, but one that carries the potential for growth if embraced with humility and honesty. Relationships are built on emotional investment, and the strength of that foundation depends on the willingness of both individuals to contribute to its growth. For many men, the reluctance to fully engage emotionally is not always intentional. It may stem from societal conditioning, fear of vulnerability, or a belief that actions alone should suffice as expressions of care. But over time, this emotional distance can create cracks in the bond, cracks that often go unnoticed until they become fractures. When a man loses her, he begins to see the moments when he could have spoken but stayed silent, the times he could have listened more deeply, but instead dismissed her concerns as unimportant. He remembers the times he avoided conflict out of fear or stubbornness, allowing unresolved issues to linger. It's not just the big fights or misunderstandings that erode a relationship, but the accumulation of these small, seemingly insignificant failures to connect. There's also the realization of how essential acknowledgement is not just of her presence, but of her emotions, struggles, and triumphs. Love cannot thrive in an environment where one partner feels unseen or unappreciated. When she tried to share her feelings, did he truly hear her, or did he listen only enough to respond? Did he recognize her efforts and sacrifices, or did he let them fade into the background, overshadowed by his own concerns? The regret over these moments of neglect often becomes sharper after she is gone. The opportunity to say, "I see you, and I value what you bring to my life," is no longer available, and the weight of those unsaid words can be profound. He starts to understand that love is not just about what is done, but about how it is communicated through words, actions, and an openness to being vulnerable. This reflection can be painful, but it carries an important truth. Emotional neglect is not always a result of malice or indifference. Sometimes it is simply the consequence of failing to prioritize what truly matters. And it is only in her absence that he begins to understand just how much was lost because of it. When a man loses someone who was deeply significant to him, one of the most profound realizations is that certain people cannot be replaced. In the immediate aftermath, there may be an attempt to fill the void through distractions, new relationships, or immersing oneself in work. But over time, it becomes evident that what was lost wasn't just the presence of a person, but the unique connection they shared, a bond that cannot be replicated with anyone else. True companionship is rare. It's not just about spending time together, it's about being truly seen and understood. She was the person who noticed the subtle shifts in his mood, who supported him when he struggled, and who celebrated his victories as though they were her own. She was more than a partner, she was a reflection of his better self, someone who held up a mirror to his strengths and his flaws with honesty and compassion. Losing her often brings the painful awareness of how much depth there was to their relationship, depth that might have been taken for granted at the time. He remembers the late-night conversations where they shared their dreams, fears, and vulnerabilities. He recalls the quiet moments of comfort where no words were needed, just the assurance of her presence. These memories are vivid and haunting, not because they are extraordinary, but because they were woven into the fabric of daily life in a way that now feels irreplaceable. Over time, the realization grows that no one else will quite understand his unique quirks, his unspoken thoughts, or the intricate history they built together. It's not that other relationships are impossible, but they are different, colored by the absence of what was once shared. This understanding often comes with a sense of longing, not just for her, but for the version of himself that existed in her presence. She brought out something in him that no one else could, and the loss of her means the loss of that part of himself. This irreplaceability is a stark reminder of the depth of human connection and the responsibility that comes with it. It teaches a man that love is not about finding someone to fill a role, but about cherishing the singular bond that grows between two people who truly see and accept each other. And once that bond is broken, its uniqueness is deeply, unforgettably felt. In the rush of daily life, it's easy to overlook the small, seemingly insignificant routines that form the bedrock of a relationship. These routines, those everyday actions that feel almost automatic, often become the first casualty when she is no longer there. A man may not recognize how deeply these shared rituals shaped his sense of comfort and connection until they are gone. It's the way she would always ask how his day went, the little rituals they had around meals, or the quiet moments spent side by side, simply existing in the same space without the need for conversation. At first, there's a sense of relief in the silence that follows. It's the relief of having fewer demands on your time, fewer expectations. But over time, that silence begins to feel more like emptiness. The routine, once a source of comfort, now underscores the loss. There is no one to share these moments with, and the weight of their absence is felt in ways that are hard to describe. Men realized that these small acts weren't trivial, they were the glue that held the relationship together. Her daily presence became an anchor in his life. Whether it was making sure he had something to eat when he was busy, offering a word of encouragement when things were tough, or simply sitting together and watching a movie, those routines provided a sense of normalcy and stability. Without her, there is a noticeable gap, one that can't be filled by external distractions or by trying to replicate those routines with someone else. These routines were more than just habits, they were expressions of love in their most tangible form. It's easy to think that love is about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but often it is in these quieter moments where true intimacy lies. When she's gone, a man starts to understand that the routine was not just a set of actions, it was a reflection of how much she cared, how well she knew him, and how invested she was in their shared life. Without it, life feels disjointed, fragmented, and incomplete. The absence of her presence in these everyday rituals serves as a painful reminder of how deeply intertwined they had become in each other's worlds. Emotional investment is the lifeblood of any meaningful relationship. It is the effort, the vulnerability, and the willingness to open oneself up to another person, to show the parts of you that are not easily exposed. In many relationships, especially those where men struggle with expressing vulnerability, emotional investment can sometimes feel like a burden. They may think that simply being present or fulfilling practical roles is enough to maintain the bond, but true intimacy requires much more. Without active emotional participation, the connection weakens, leaving both individuals drifting apart, even if they are physically close. When she is gone, a man often comes face to face with the painful realization that he did not offer enough of himself. Emotional connection is not just about sharing grand experiences or declarations of love. It's also about the smaller, everyday acts of engagement, checking in with her feelings, listening to her concerns, sharing his own thoughts and emotions. It's the way he shows up, not just in the good times, but in the difficult, vulnerable moments, making it clear that he values her emotional world as much as his own. The absence of this emotional investment in the relationship creates a void that no external distraction can fill. It becomes clear that love cannot survive without the effort of truly understanding one another. She may have tried over and over to offer emotional support, to create a space where both partners could be open and honest. But if that emotional exchange was one-sided or inconsistent, the relationship becomes imbalanced. The result is often a lingering sense of dissatisfaction, a sense that something is missing, but not being able to pinpoint exactly what it is until it's too late. The loss of this emotional connection is not just about missing the person, it's about missing the partnership that was forged through shared emotional experiences. A man begins to recognize the importance of being vulnerable and emotionally engaged, and how his reluctance to do so may have caused cracks in the foundation of the relationship. In the silence after her departure, the emptiness left by the lack of that emotional investment becomes painfully apparent. And the weight of this realization can be overwhelming. When you lose someone who is not just your partner but your true companion, the depth of that loss is far more than the absence of a person. It's the loss of the one person who truly understood you, who stood by you not just in the good moments, but through the struggles, the challenges, and the moments when you couldn't even explain yourself. This companionship was a bond built on mutual understanding, shared experiences, and a level of comfort with each other that cannot be replicated. What often becomes painfully clear after she is gone is how rare this kind of connection truly is. There are many people in the world who will come and go, but few will ever hold the same significance as the one who truly knows you, the one who not only understands your dreams and aspirations, but also accepts your flaws, your insecurities, and the parts of you that are harder to accept. She was the person who, even in your darkest moments, saw your potential and believed in you when you could not believe in yourself. The loss of such a deep, genuine companionship can feel like a piece of your identity has been ripped away. It's the loss of someone who helped you see the world differently, who supported you in ways that were often invisible but essential to your emotional well-being. She was the person you could turn to for comfort without the need for words, who knew when you needed space and when you need a shoulder to lean on. Men often realize too late that this kind of bond is something that cannot be found again easily, if at all. While new relationships may bring companionship, they are different, marked by the absence of shared history, the absence of the deep, unspoken understanding that was formed over time. The companionship you had with her wasn't just a relationship, it was a safe harbor, a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and an innate sense of knowing each other in ways others simply cannot. When she's gone, there's no one to turn to who carries that same weight of understanding, and the emptiness that follows can be profound. It's the realization that true companionship isn't just about shared time or proximity, it's about the depth of connection. The sense that you've found someone who truly sees you for who you are and still chooses to walk alongside you. The absence of that, no matter how much time passes, remains a reminder of how rare and precious a bond like that truly is. After losing someone who meant so much, a man often faces the harsh truth that relationships require more than just good intentions, they require accountability. In the moment, it's easy to justify mistakes, missteps, or moments of neglect. It's easy to point fingers at circumstances or external factors, but once she is gone, the full weight of personal responsibility comes into sharp focus. The questions arise: could I have done more? Was I truly present in the ways I promised? How much of what happened was within my control? And how much did I avoid confronting because it was easier to blame external forces? Real accountability comes when a man is forced to look inward, to confront the truth about his actions, or sometimes the lack thereof. The emotional distance that develops in a relationship doesn't just appear, it's the result of gradual decisions, habits, and sometimes a conscious choice to avoid deeper engagement or hard conversations. And when the relationship ends, these choices become impossible to ignore. He realizes that while both partners contribute to the dynamics of a relationship, he too had a part to play in its breakdown. Whether it was through neglecting her needs, dismissing her emotions, or failing to put in the work necessary to address issues before they became insurmountable. A man comes to understand that accountability is not just about owning up to mistakes, but about recognizing the ongoing choices that led to them. Men often wrestle with the truth that they were not as supportive as they could have been, not as consistent in their efforts, or not as emotionally available as their partner needed. It's only in her absence that the full magnitude of those realizations begins to settle in. He may see how his own behaviors, whether intentional or not, created distance between them, how his refusal to acknowledge her needs left her feeling invisible or unimportant. The pattern of dismissing her feelings, of avoiding difficult conversations, becomes apparent in ways that are often difficult to come to terms with. The painful truth is that personal growth and accountability are a choice, and often they are choices that should have been made long before the relationship ended. Men learn that accountability isn't just about admitting fault. It's about consistently showing up in ways that matter, being proactive in addressing issues, and being honest about one's own shortcomings. It's a realization that, in the absence of this responsibility, relationships falter. Without the willingness to own their part in the dynamics of a relationship, men come to see that they lost not only her, but also the chance to evolve into a better partner. When a man loses someone significant in his life, the impact reverberates far beyond the immediate loss of the relationship. The effects often extend into other areas of his life, touching his work, his friendships, and his general sense of well-being. Losing a partner is not just an emotional blow, it creates a ripple effect that alters the fabric of daily existence. The absence of someone who was once a central figure leaves behind a noticeable gap that influences nearly everything he does. His work might lose its drive, his focus compromised by the emotional turmoil he is left to navigate. What once provided clarity and purpose may now feel distant, as if the energy he poured into his career was somehow intertwined with the energy of the relationship. With her gone, a sense of emptiness might creep into his professional life, affecting his motivation, creativity, or even his overall sense of direction. The tasks that once seemed manageable now feel more like burdens, overshadowed by the grief and loss he's experiencing. Friendships, too, can become strained in the wake of such a loss. People around him may not fully understand the depth of what he is going through, and as a result, he may retreat into himself, feeling disconnected from those who once brought him comfort. His social interactions may feel superficial, as if everyone else is still living in a world that he can no longer fully participate in. The support that he would once offer others may now be something he feels unable to give. There's a loneliness in this, the sense that no matter how much people care, they can never truly understand what he's lost. Even his mental health may begin to deteriorate as he grapples with the emotional fallout. The weight of the loss, compounded by the realization of what he could have done differently, can manifest as anxiety, depression, or even an overwhelming sense of numbness. The sadness can spill over into every corner of his life, making it difficult to focus, to care, or to find joy in the things that once brought him happiness. What was once a balanced, functioning existence can start to feel fractured and chaotic, as if the loss has not only affected his emotional state, but also his ability to navigate the world around him. This ripple effect is a painful reminder that relationships are never isolated from the rest of life. When one part of the system falters, it creates an imbalance that touches every other part. It forces a man to confront the interconnectedness of his existence, to realize that the presence of someone he loved and relied on was far more central to his well-being than he ever fully acknowledged. The consequences of pride are often subtle and insidious, creeping into relationships in ways that can be difficult to detect until it's too late. For many men, their pride can prevent them from being fully open, from admitting faults, or from making the necessary compromises to preserve the relationship. In the face of conflict, the desire to win or to protect one's ego can overshadow the need for empathy, understanding, and vulnerability. When pride becomes the guiding force in a relationship, it fosters an environment where emotional walls are built, and true connection becomes more difficult. Men often don't recognize how much their pride stands in the way until after they've lost her. When arguments arise, their instinct might be to defend themselves, to prove that they were right, rather than to listen and understand her perspective. This defensiveness, often rooted in fear of being seen as weak or wrong, can escalate minor disagreements into major rifts. The more pride is involved, the more distance forms between partners, until the relationship begins to feel like a battleground rather than a partnership. The reluctance to apologize, to admit mistakes, or to compromise becomes the silent poison in the relationship. There's a sense that showing vulnerability or asking for forgiveness would be a loss of power or control. This need to be right can create a toxic cycle where both partners are entrenched in their positions, unable or unwilling to bridge the gap between them. The issue isn't the disagreement itself, but the unwillingness to soften one's stance for the sake of the relationship. In those moments, pride can seem like a protective shield, but it is, in reality, a barrier that prevents healing, understanding, and connection. When she's gone, the price of this pride becomes painfully clear. The inability to apologize, to admit wrongdoing, or to soften in the face of tension becomes a source of regret. What seemed like an act of self-preservation, the desire to maintain one's dignity, now feels like a self-inflicted wound. The realization hits that, by holding on to pride, a man may have pushed her away when all she needed was a genuine expression of vulnerability, a willingness to meet her halfway. This truth is difficult to confront because it challenges deeply ingrained notions of strength, masculinity, and self-worth. But in the absence of her, men come to see that real strength lies in the ability to acknowledge one's flaws, to own up to mistakes, and to have the humility to seek reconciliation. The lesson is harsh but undeniable. Pride, while often seen as a source of protection, is ultimately the thing that destroys the very connection one holds dear. Self-awareness is a cornerstone of personal growth and healthy relationships, but it is something that is often neglected or overlooked until faced with the loss of something significant. When a man loses a partner, the initial grief can blur his understanding of the situation, but over time the clarity begins to emerge. The loss was not just the result of external circumstances, but of internal patterns, behaviors, and blind spots that he had failed to address. Losing her forces him to turn inward, to face the parts of himself he had ignored or repressed. It's the sudden, uncomfortable realization that while relationships require effort, they also require self-awareness, a deep understanding of one's own flaws, triggers, and areas for growth. Men may not always recognize the unconscious ways in which they contribute to their own problems, especially in the context of a relationship. For example, he may have had a tendency to avoid conflict, to bottle up emotions rather than express them, or to be overly self-reliant, refusing help when it was needed. These habits, often rooted in past experiences or fears, can create distance between partners. The loss of the relationship becomes a mirror reflecting back to him the ways in which his actions or inactions may have contributed to the deterioration of the bond. As the days pass and the dust settles, the need for self-reflection becomes unavoidable. He starts to see the moments where he shut down, the times when he could have communicated better, or when he could have been more present emotionally. It becomes clear that much of the tension in the relationship stemmed not just from external factors, but from an internal lack of awareness, his inability to recognize his own emotional needs or his reluctance to be vulnerable with her. Through this painful process, he also becomes aware of how his own patterns of behavior influenced the way he responded to her needs, desires, and emotions. When a partner is trying to communicate and one person is closed off or dismissive, it sends a message that their feelings aren't valued. Self-awareness in this context is not just about identifying flaws, but also understanding how those flaws manifest in interactions with others, especially those closest to you. It's about recognizing how your actions, whether intentional or not, affect the dynamic of the relationship. This self-awareness can be uncomfortable, but it's an essential step toward personal growth. It's easy to blame the other person, to focus solely on what they did wrong. But true growth comes when a man turns the focus inward. When he asks himself how he could have been better, how his own limitations or unresolved issues contributed to the breakdown of the relationship. The loss of her provides an opportunity for self-awareness, but it's also a painful reminder of how crucial it is to develop that awareness before it's too late. When a man loses a significant relationship, it often brings with it a deep sense of regret over missed opportunities to truly show up for his partner. These opportunities are not always about grand gestures or big moments. More often, they are the small, everyday acts of care, affection, and attentiveness that build trust and emotional intimacy over time. It's the moments when she needed support, but he was too distracted or busy with other things, the times when he failed to recognize her silent struggles, or the occasions when he did not prioritize her feelings because other aspects of life seemed more pressing. In the aftermath of the loss, these missed chances begin to weigh heavily on him as he realizes how much could have been different if he had just been more present, more tuned into her needs. The pain of this realization is that it's often not the major mistakes or dramatic failures that stand out the most, but these quiet, unremarkable moments where he could have chosen differently. A simple phone call, a thoughtful gesture, a word of encouragement, these are the actions that might have made a world of difference. The regret comes from the understanding that these small choices, when added up over time, form the foundation of a healthy, lasting relationship. And once those moments pass, once she is gone, there's a deep sorrow in knowing that those opportunities have vanished, perhaps forever. A man often finds himself replaying these moments in his mind, wondering what could have been if he had been more attentive, if he had made more of an effort to be emotionally available. He starts to see how easy it would have been to make her feel valued, to show her that she mattered as much as anything else in his life. But instead, he allowed the mundane distractions of life, work, or his own emotional walls to take precedence. This realization is painful because it forces him to confront how much he took her presence, her love, and her devotion for granted. The regret is also compounded by the understanding that these small, seemingly insignificant moments were actually the building blocks of a deeper connection. It was not the big declarations of love or the milestone events that defined the relationship, but these quiet, everyday affirmations of care. She wanted him to see her, to acknowledge her needs, to show that he was willing to invest in their shared life. The missed opportunities to do so often feel like missed chances to truly demonstrate his love, to prove that he understood the depth of what she brought to his life. The absence of these opportunities after the relationship ends brings the harsh truth into sharp relief. Love is made in the details, and those details, when ignored or overlooked, create a distance that becomes harder to bridge as time passes. The loss of these moments and the regret that follows reveals the fragility of human connection and the profound importance of showing up in the small ways every day. One of the most challenging realizations that comes after the loss of someone significant is the overwhelming sense of how much one's life revolved around the partnership. It's not just the absence of a person, but the absence of a lifestyle, a rhythm that had been shaped by her presence. Every part of his life, even the mundane aspects, had been intertwined with hers. From the way weekends were spent together, to the shared plans for the future, to the simple habit of knowing she would be there at the end of a long day, everything had a shared purpose and meaning. In the aftermath of the relationship, those familiar routines are disrupted, leaving him with a profound sense of disorientation. The absence becomes more than just a void of missing her, it is the loss of a sense of normalcy. Daily life becomes difficult to navigate when so many of its rhythms were shaped by the shared partnership. The seemingly simple act of waking up, knowing she would be there to talk about the day ahead, now becomes an empty ritual. The quiet moments that once filled his day with connection now become a reminder of her absence. The routine that once felt comforting and natural is replaced with an unsettling silence. Even the small tasks, grocery shopping, watching a show together, or walking to the car become painful reminders of how integral she was to the structure of his day-to-day life. What is perhaps most difficult to come to terms with is the realization that much of the future he envisioned was intertwined with her. The plans they made together, the dreams they shared for what their life would look like are now undone. The hopes for family, for travel, for shared adventures all had her as an integral part of the narrative. Now, without her, those visions feel incomplete. The future that once seemed full of promise becomes uncertain, leaving him to reckon with the painful truth that the trajectory of his life has drastically changed. This shift is not just about losing the physical presence of another person, it's about losing the collective momentum that came from building something together. Her absence forces him to reconsider his life's direction. He is left not just grieving her, but also the life he had imagined with her. And this can feel like starting over from scratch, trying to piece together a future that no longer fits with the expectations or dreams that were once shared. There is a sense of having to relearn how to navigate the world alone without the familiar framework that once felt secure and meaningful. Over time, he begins to realize just how much of his identity and his sense of fulfillment had been rooted in the relationship. This is not necessarily a negative reflection on the relationship itself, but an acknowledgement that love and partnership often shape the way we see ourselves and our lives. When that partnership is no longer there, it forces him to confront who he is without it and how he can move forward without the structures that once defined his day-to-day existence. When a man loses someone who was once his partner, the aftermath often uncovers the deep layers of emotional dependence that had quietly developed over time. This realization doesn't come immediately. In the beginning, the grief and loss are so overwhelming that the emotional reliance is not clearly understood. It's only after the initial shock begins to fade that he starts to see how much of his emotional stability was tied to her presence. She wasn't just a person in his life, she was a source of emotional balance, a stabilizing force that grounded him in ways he had taken for granted. In many relationships, especially those where vulnerability is not easily shared, one partner often assumes the role of emotional caretaker without even realizing it. She may have been the one he turned to when his day was hard, the one who helped him process his feelings, or the one who reassured him when he felt uncertain about himself or the future. Over time, these moments of emotional reliance can build a deep attachment, making it harder to function fully when she is no longer around. Her absence doesn't just bring the pain of missing her, brings the realization of how much he relied on her emotional support to navigate the challenges of life. This dependence becomes most apparent during moments of stress or difficulty, where he once had someone to lean on, someone who understood him deeply and could offer comfort or advice. Now there is a void. In the face of life's struggles, he may feel less equipped to handle them alone. It's as if his emotional resilience was linked to the partnership, and without her, he is left with a sense of fragility he never fully recognized. The strength he once derived from the relationship now feels absent, leaving him to confront the harsh truth that his emotional independence may not have been as developed as he thought. The process of rebuilding after such a loss is not just about grieving the person, but also about rebuilding one's own sense of emotional strength. It requires confronting the truth that he may have relied too heavily on another person for support, and now he must learn to stand on his own emotionally. This doesn't mean that dependence in relationships is inherently wrong. Rather, it highlights the importance of balancing emotional interdependence with personal resilience. The loss becomes an opportunity for growth, a chance to learn how to cultivate emotional strength independently, to process emotions without leaning so heavily on another person, and to rediscover a sense of self that was perhaps obscured by the emotional reliance on someone else. In the end, the realization that he had emotionally depended on her, perhaps more than he acknowledged at the time, can be both humbling and painful. It brings a deeper understanding of what it takes to be fully autonomous and emotionally resilient, and it serves as a reminder that while love and connection are vital, personal strength must also be nurtured and developed in its own right. In the end, losing someone is a wake-up call, a moment where the truth comes into sharp focus, often painfully so. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, the ways we've fallen short, and the things we've taken for granted. But it also presents an opportunity for growth, for introspection, and for learning how to become better versions of ourselves. As we look back on what was lost, we begin to understand the value of the things we didn't always recognize in the moment: the companionship, the self-awareness, the small opportunities to show up and be present. These lessons, hard as they may be to learn, offer the chance to rebuild not only our relationships but ourselves. The loss of her teaches us that love is not just about the connection we share with another. It's about understanding ourselves, being accountable for our actions, and becoming emotionally strong enough to stand on our own. If we are willing to face the reality of what we've lost and the mistakes we've made, we can transform that pain into a pathway for becoming more whole, more aware, and more capable of truly loving in the future.